Regular price.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams ran over the Arizona Cardinals. Running back Kyron Williams had 158 yards rushing. 154 of those came in the second half. Williams had one of the Rams' 2 touchdowns. The Rams are 3-3. The 2-2 Chargers are in action tonight at SoFi against the Dallas Cowboys. 5:15 kickoff on ESPN. No more undefeated teams in the NFL. The last 2 went down yesterday. Philadelphia lost to the New York Jets. The Eagles were shut out in the second half. The 49ers missed a field goal in the final seconds at Cleveland. They lose by 2. LeBron James and Austin Reeves did not play last night in the Lakers' preseason loss to Milwaukee at Crypto.com. First game together for Milwaukee stars Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard. They played the first half and combined for 31 points. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Follow the leader.
Following the leader.
Oh my God. Follow the leader. 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 Follow the leader.
1, 2, 3, go! I'm gonna try to keep it coming. Things ain't always smooth, but I'll be alright as long as I can find the groove. Yes, I will. Somehow I know that I can make it. You seem to like my style. Don't you worry, I'm gonna be around a while. Yes, I will. I'm just happy to see you talk to me back in style again.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's show, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get updates on X, that's formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. And by the way, should you miss any part of today's program or want to catch up on previous shows, you can always visit thetavisSmileyShow.com. That's thetavisSmileyShow.com, or wherever you get your podcast, and listen to the Tavis Smiley podcast at your leisure. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, a conversation about Jews and stolen land, but not the one you think. We'll get to that dialogue in just moments here in our first hour. No, this conversation is about Rebecca Claren's Jewish ancestors who fled a violent ethnic riot in Russia for the United States and started their lives over again in South Dakota. Over the next few decades, her family went on to become a celebrated American immigrant success story. But what none of Claren's ancestors ever mentioned was that their land, the foundation for much of their wealth, had been cruelly taken from Native American peoples by the U.S. government. In her new book, she explores the connection between her family's history and the disenfranchisement of the Lakota people. We'll do that in hour 2. In our third hour, 2 conversations. Up first, Danny Mullen, owner of the only black and woman-owned bookstore in Chicago, joins us to explain her mission to provide access to and build interest in books for minority communities. Danny Mullen also has a fall reading list she'll share with us. I look forward to that reading list. On the B side of hour 3, celebrating Phyllis Wheatley, America's first published black poet, 250 years later. We'll be joined by University of Wisconsin-Madison professor Brigitte Fielder. But in this first hour, 2 more conversations on the B side of this hour. We'll unpack some interesting comments from actor and comedian Kevin Hart about the lack of people with bank accounts from low-income areas. Specifically, his comments that these people aren't smart enough. That's his phrase. They aren't smart enough to open bank accounts. Okay. We'll be joined by the CEO of Lendistry, Everett Sands, to interrogate Kevin Hart's comments that have now gone viral. All that said, we commence today's show with the escalating war in the Middle East between Hamas and Israel as Israel's ground offensive begins. Pleased to be joined by the director of the New Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Studies, Phyllis Bennis. Phyllis, good to have you back. How are you today?
Well, it's a rough day, Tavis, but I'm really glad to be here with you.
No, it is a rough day, and I'm glad to have you here. Nobody I'd rather talk to than you, at least to start this program about this particular issue. Let me just start broad, and we'll narrow as we move through our time together. What's your read on where things stand, where things are at this moment?
This is an incredibly dangerous moment. The war against people, ordinary people in Gaza, is escalating massively. Not against Hamas, as the Israelis have put it. They're saying this is all in retaliation for the terrible actions, the horrific actions that Hamas militants took last week on Saturday, when over 1,000 Israelis were killed in incredibly cruel ways, including elders and babies and families. It was a horrific act. And we're seeing, in response to that, a massive Israeli war using U.S.-supplied weapons paid for, 20% of it is paid by our tax money, against the entire population of Gaza, which is 2.2 million people, half of whom are under the age of 18. Children who in their short years of life have known at least 5 wars already. And now, with this order to evacuate all of the northern half of the Gaza Strip, that's over 1 million people, Tavis, who live in this overcrowded little scrap of land. They're being forced south, where there are no possible ways that they can get any kind of support. There's no housing. There's no medical care. The hospitals have shut down. The Israelis have cut off all water, electricity, food, and fuel to the entire Gaza Strip. The hospitals say they will be closing both in the north and the south within hours because their outside generators are running out of fuel. And in the meantime, the bombing is continuing. 2,750 Palestinians so far that are known have already been killed in the bombings this week. And that doesn't count the 1,000 plus that are known to be missing and that are buried among the rubble of the massive destruction that's been called. So we're looking at a looming genocide, and I use that word very carefully and very advisedly because of what international law says about genocide. And we're looking at a desperate need for a ceasefire. That's the bottom line. We need a ceasefire now on all sides. On all sides.
Given that Hamas is the elected governing authority, how would you respond to folk who say then that the Palestinian people brought this on themselves?
You know, it's a very complicated situation. The election that people refer to was held back in 2006. The Hamas leadership was elected for 4 years, as was the case in the West Bank, where Fatah was elected for 4 years. Neither the West Bank nor Gaza have been able to hold elections for more than 17 years. So it's a completely illegitimate government. There's no question about that, and has very little support. But any notion that people, ordinary people, should be punished for the actions of a government, legal or illegal, legitimate or illegitimate, the actions of others, amounts to collective punishment. And that's a war crime. When Hamas killed ordinary Israeli families, that was a war crime. It was also collective punishment. This is collective punishment carried out by a state which the United States government claims is our closest ally in the region. And they're doing it with our money and our weapons, and our president refusing to call for a ceasefire.
Not just refusing to call for a ceasefire, but if we ought to to believe the reports that we are reading, Joe Biden may be making a visit to Israel. For all we know, these things happen under the cover of darkness oftentimes. But everything I'm reading, and I'm sure Phyllis is reading the same thing and more, suggests that President Joe Biden, in the middle of all this, may be on his way to Israel to make a visit. On top of his comments, on top of the stuff we're sending them to support this war, he may be actually headed to Jerusalem. When we come forward, I want to get straight to this distinction that the president and his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, continue to try to make, and I'm not sure it's working. They keep trying to draw this line between Hamas and the Palestinian people, that Hamas is not the Palestinian people. I'm not sure that distinction is working. We'll get Phyllis's take on that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac, perfected like Zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop. Haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat intellect since '92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shout it, don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You hear me? You hear me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly we're hustling, bustin', truckin'. Cadillac, Cadillac, Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit Cadillac.com.
Available late 2024. GM estimate 450-mile range. On a full charge based on development testing and/or analytical projection. Consistent with SCHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience, temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
The Green Foundation, key health influencer, empowering our Black communities through action. The Green Foundation advocates for affordable health care, accessibility, and knows the importance of culturally relatable health care. Regardless of income, we believe it is a right for optimum health. The Green Foundation has been at the forefront for 25 years, dedicated solely to promoting prevention through early detection, annual screenings, and nutrition. We know you because we are you. Our hand-holding approach supports you and your family to receive your right to be treated fairly and receiving quality healthcare services. We want you and your family to know COVID-19 was devastating to our families and to our wallet. We can build back better by understanding prevention, wearing your mask, washing your hands, social distancing, and understanding the impact of long COVID. Get the care you deserve. Take advantage of your privileges. Contact us, info@thegreenfoundation.net. info@thegreenfoundation.net.
For all of us, this generation and the next, there is simply no place in our lives for litter. And yet, it's everywhere we look. And unfortunately, it does belong to all of us. So, let's come together and create a litter-free, clean California, once and for all. Remember to properly dispose of your trash and recycling. Secure truckloads with tarps to keep debris from flying out. Clean out your car when you're at a gas station. Take pride in your community by organizing a cleanup event. Or join a cleanup event near you. Zero litter is the goal. Join us at cleanca.com. That's cleanca.com. Let's do it together. Brought to you by Caltrans. cleanca.com.
Made fresh daily in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Phyllis Bennis, the administration keeps making this point time and time again, whether out of the mouth of Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, or the President of these United States, Joe Biden, and others, making the point that Hamas is not the Palestinian people. You detailed quite nicely a moment ago how this election cycle, or lack thereof, frankly, has worked inside of Palestine. But what do you make of this distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people, and whether or not that distinction is working?
Well, I think there's no question, Tavis, that the elected leadership from 2006, which has been sort of governing in Gaza, despite the fact that Israel actually controls the besieged Gaza Strip, before this new siege was imposed, we should realize Gaza was under a siege for 16 years, where water, electricity were always in short supply, medicine, everything had to be approved piece by piece by piece by Israeli officials before it would be allowed into the Strip. No one was allowed out without an Israeli permit, and very few could get those permits. So that was the reality even before this recent crisis. There's no question that the governing forces, and Hamas is much more than just the militant wing. It has a political wing that has been, a major political party in both the West Bank and Gaza. So it's much more than just the militant wing also. But there's no question that it does not equate to the Palestinian people as a whole or the Gaza population as a whole. Mm-hmm. The crucial point, though, I think, Tavis, is that it's not really the right question. Mm-hmm. the point is that even if every single person in Gaza supported Hamas, it would still be collective punishment to drop bombs that are destroying the lives and the infrastructure of a city, a set of cities and towns of 2.2 million people, of whom 1.1 million are children. It doesn't matter who they support. If they were not involved in any acts of terrible violence as that happened last Saturday, which clearly the overwhelming majority of the Gaza population was not in any way involved in that, it is collective punishment. Yeah. To be using bombing raids and this level of really deathly denial of things like water and electricity, where you have hospitals that need electricity for patients who are living by respirators. Without electricity, they will die. It is a death sentence.
My friend Jesse Jackson has often said, Reverend Jackson more than once has opined, that content without context is pretext. Only Jesse can say that. That content without context is pretext. What say you to those who always have these conversations around the content of what's happening in real time, but that content often lacks context? And that's one of the arguments that the Palestinian people and those who defend them continue to make, that this conversation about the content of the now lacks context about the then. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And my friend Reverend Jackson as well, I was on his show yesterday talking about exactly that issue of context. You know, the issue is the context is also now. The context is not only the past.
Yes.
The context right now is that there is a population in Israel that is still completely traumatized by these outrages that happened last Saturday. There's no question about that. And that needs to be taken very seriously. And those who carried out those horrific attacks need to be held accountable, brought to trial, whatever it takes. And, it's not but and, the context is also, the context of today is that Israel has now been bombing for 10 days against a population that did not carry out those horrific attacks and are continuing to die in enormous numbers. The latest figures are that somewhere over 2,750 Palestinians are confirmed dead. There's another 1,000 plus missing and presumably buried under the remains of the buildings that have been destroyed. And a quarter of them are children. Again, children dying again. That is the context of today. And it's for that reason that we need a ceasefire so desperately. There are still some Hamas rockets going into Israel. Thankfully, it appears that virtually none of them have done any damage and no one has been injured in recent days since the horrors of last weekend. So that's a good thing. And it's also true that those rockets that are going in are also a violation of international law because they cannot be targeted at military targets. And in that context, they are violating international law. So we need a ceasefire on all sides. We have to stop killing people, which is what is happening right now. Israel is killing people in the thousands as we speak. So that's the context, too.
I don't disagree with you about the ceasefire. I think people around the globe would welcome that. And yet, and I'm not naive in saying this, as you well know, and yet you're calling for a ceasefire, as much as I respect it and agree with it, doesn't quite matter as much as Joe Biden and other world leaders calling for a ceasefire, and nobody's doing that right now, Phyllis. So it's one thing to call for it, but how do you get to it if the right folk don't call for it?
I think it could put the pressure on those folk. There was a letter that was signed by 55 members of Congress on Friday, led by Congresspeople Jan Schakowsky and Mark Pocan. Mark Pocan is a heroic congressman who has spent time in the Gaza Strip. He knows the situation there, and he's been talking to his other members of Congress. They have 55 signatures on a letter to President Biden urging that he press the Israelis to stop all violations of international law and to allow in humanitarian aid. That's a good first step. But it is by far not enough because they didn't explicitly say we need a ceasefire. Congress needs to be calling on the Biden administration People need to be calling on the Biden administration, calling into radio talk shows, writing letters to the editor, protesting outside the White House. There's a protest going on today, I think right now as we speak, of Jews against genocide, saying we need a ceasefire now. That's the demand. It's a simple demand. It's clear. People can have all kinds of views about how to talk about it and what the discourse is and all those things, and those are important. Mm-hmm. We need to talk about the legacy of why violence like this would erupt from Gaza. All of that is important, but right now, the only thing that matters is a ceasefire. Yeah. So anyone who has any access to influencers online, to members of Congress, to anybody with ties to the White House, the language should be, we need a ceasefire right now.
Let me leave the Middle East. Not really, but I want to come stateside for just a moment, since you're talking about Congress and what ought to be done inside of Congress, putting pressure on them to pressure the president to call for a ceasefire. Let me just raise a couple of domestic issues here. So there've been any number of them, but this particular meme that I want to read to you was circulating everywhere this weekend. There were a number of prominent American Jews who posted it, including the comedian Amy Schumer. A lot of people were talking about this over the weekend. It popped up in my feeds countless times. Let me just read the language to you. It's written inside the Star of David, the image of the Star of David, and it says, and I quote, "First they came for LGBTQ, and I stood up because love is love. Then they came for immigrants, and I stood up because families belong together. Then they came for the black community, and I stood up because black lives matter. Then they came for me, but I stood alone because I am a Jew." That meme was trending everywhere this weekend, again, posted by a number of prominent Jewish Americans, including Amy Schumer. And I raised it only to ask your comment on how the Jewish community in this moment, some certainly are advancing this notion that they are the victims in this process, and that nobody is standing with them.
Yeah. You know, Jews around the world are mourning the dead of 12 to 1,300 innocent people who were killed in Israel. That's a reality, a horrifying reality. And those Jews in Israel were victims of a terrible crime. The notion that both those things that this meme claims, one, that somehow the Jews stand alone, simply flies in the face of how the media has treated this, how government officials, particularly in this country, has 420 some odd members of Congress, which means all but about 10 are sponsors of a resolution that simply says I don't know the exact language, but it basically says we stand only with Israel. Mm-hmm. It does not mention Palestinian casualties of this war. It does not express any concern about Palestinian civilians. It does not call out Israeli violations of international law. It does not say anything about the fact that the United States taxpayers are paying 20% of Israel's military budget. None of that. It simply says unequivocally, we stand with Israel and we will provide Israel with whatever they want and need to fight against this atrocity. The problem with that, of course, is, again, the issue of collective punishment, the issue of not distinguishing between combatant and civilian. There's a host of violations of international law here. The notion that somehow, I mean, those of us like myself who are Jewish, to believe that we stand alone is simply, that's never been the case. The reality is that there are plenty of people, including the Jews Against Genocide, who are today in front of the White House calling for a ceasefire, are saying everyone has been harmed by this, and that we need to follow the trajectory, the call of the great union organizer, Mother Jones, who said, pray for the dead, mourn the dead, and fight like hell for the living. Mm-hmm. We have to do both those things. We have to hold in our hands both realities, that Israeli Jews were the victims of this particular horrific crime. And it's also true that Palestinians have lived under policies that amount to what Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign calls policy violence, of policies of Israel that have themselves violated international law, violated the prohibitions on collective punishment, etc. So this notion that, one, that Jews are the only victims, and two, that the Jewish victims that certainly do exist somehow stand alone is simply, I think, a specious argument.
Yep. I got 3 or 4 minutes left here watching my time. I want to move to this. Since you mentioned the American media, you've just laid out quite nicely where the government stands, and there's no question about that. The president said twice, we stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And to your point about those 420 members of the House who've also essentially said the same thing. There's no question where the U.S. government stands. You mentioned the media, though. I want to come to the media right quick. There was a story that broke over the weekend. Doesn't get a lot of play, and it won't surprise you when I tell you what I'm talking about here. There's a big story over the weekend that broke about MSNBC having suspended the shows of 3 Muslim anchors amid the Israeli war in Gaza. Sources have confirmed that Mehdi Hassan, Ayman Mohideen, and Ali Velshi. I only know Ali Velshi of the 3 of them personally. But the 3 of them were sort of taken out of their anchor chairs. There's a lot of back and forth about this. MSNBC is sort of denying it, saying that they weren't taken out because of their comments, because of the war. But they all 3 sort of disappeared, as it were, to some extent over the weekend. And the story that's being talked about is whether or not this in part happened because it primarily happened because of their commentary or expected commentary about the war inside Palestine. My question is not so much to get into the weeds about that per se, although that's a significant story that isn't getting the kind of coverage I think it ought to get. But it does raise questions about the way the American media is handling this story and whether a network would literally take 3 Muslim anchors off the air in the middle of all this for some unknown reason. I'm putting unknown in air quotes. That's a broad way of getting to a simple question, which is how do you read the way the American media is covering this current conflict?
I would say the brief version is the media coverage of this crisis has been significantly better than that of earlier Israeli assaults on Gaza, earlier crises, earlier escalations in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Having said that, it is still horrifyingly one-sided. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's no question that, during the week, I didn't have a chance to watch much television. I was rushing around too much, mm-hmm. meeting with different people and whatever. But when I did have on MSNBC a fair amount, and I was very pleasantly surprised at the even-handedness. They had U.S. officials, they had generals, they had former generals and present generals and Israeli officials, and they had significantly more Palestinian voices and critics of Israeli policy than I have heard before. Mm-hmm. The fact that it was 3 Muslim anchors who were the ones bringing on other voices, it's the combination of factors that I have no doubt played a role if they were indeed taken out of their anchor chairs. I confess I haven't watched much TV over the weekend, sure. So I don't know that firsthand, but I would have no doubt that would be true. So both things are true. It's much better than it used to be. The discourse shift at the public level has also reached the media over the last 20, 25 years. So, the things that we see at the public level, the fact that in a recent poll, 25% of American Jews say Israel is an apartheid state, those kinds of things have an impact on the media coverage. But it is still overwhelmingly one-sided. That is still true.
I've got 30 seconds here. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being extremely hopeful, how hopeful are you that we will see a ceasefire anytime in the near future?
Oh, dear. The near future, I would say 2. Yeah. Medium term, maybe 4, but I'm afraid too many people will die. The demand must be a ceasefire now, and I urge all of your listeners, call their members of Congress, call their friends on the LA City Council. Anyone with a microphone should be calling for a ceasefire on all sides. This is not one side or the other. We need to stop the killing on all sides.
Yep. That advice goes out to not just listeners in L.A., but Philadelphia and Chicago and New Orleans and Mississippi and all around the country where this program is heard. We hear the advice. The wise counsel of Phyllis Bennis, who is the director of the New Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. Phyllis, good to have you back on this program. We'll do it again, I'm sure, as this process sadly continues. Thanks for your time today, though.
Thank you, Tavis.
Everett Sands on Kevin Hart's controversial comments when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Thank you for joining us on this Monday morning here at the Black Information Network. I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest. Attorney General Merrick Garland is opening up a federal hate crimes investigation into the death of a child. The 6-year-old Chicago, Illinois boy was stabbed over a dozen times on Saturday. His mother was also injured in the attack that authorities say was carried out by the family's landlord. He's now charged with first-degree murder, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and 2 counts of a hate crime. United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain is looking to gain control over what's perceived as the rebellion against the union's bureaucracy. Saturday, Fain visited with Mack truck workers in Pennsylvania and Maryland. This a week after Mack truck workers rejected the proposed sellout offer for thousands of employees. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Still seeing a top as you travel in Diamond Bar. This is going to be on our 57 north as you get towards that 60. The right lane is what's blocked with a crash. Coming away from Pathfinder, the busy drive. Compton, Paramount, mentioned this earlier, stalled Big Rig. It's on the 710 south. South 710 just past Alondra onto the right shoulder. So right around Firestone Boulevard is where you're on and off the brakes. Headed through Arleta, Pacoima, taking the 5 north. Approaching Van Nuys is where we do have a collision onto the right shoulder. That is slowed the drive there from Osborne Street. Echo Park on the 101 south at Glendale Boulevard Union. 3 middle lanes blocked with a crash. We're slow from Sunset. And on the 101 north into Hollywood at Sunset, stalled vehicle onto the right shoulder here. That's busy to drive from Vermont.
Wendy's new breakfast 2 for $3 Biggie Bundles lets you choose from your fave 4, including a sausage or egg and cheese biscuit, small seasoned potatoes, or medium hot coffee. Limited time only during breakfast hours. U.S. price and participation may vary. Not valid in a combo. Single item at regular price.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man. The Rams ran over the Arizona Cardinals. Running back Kyron Williams had 158 yards rushing. 154 of those came in the second half. Williams had one of the Rams' 2 touchdowns. The Rams are 3-3. The 2-2 Chargers are in action tonight at SoFi against the Dallas Cowboys. 5:15 kickoff on ESPN. No more undefeated teams in the NFL. The last 2 went down yesterday. Philadelphia lost to the New York Jets. The Eagles were shut out in the second half. The 49ers missed a field goal in the final seconds at Cleveland. They lose by 2. LeBron James and Austin Reeves did not play last night in the Lakers' preseason loss to Milwaukee at Crypto.com. First game together for Milwaukee stars Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard. They played the first half and combined for 31 points. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Hi, I'm Kyle at Blindster.com. Shopping for new blinds? At Blindster, we offer over 50 different blinds, shades, and shutters at low prices, custom made for your windows, and shipping is free. Shop at home and order 10 free samples of any product before you buy. Blindster.com.
Hey, son, how are you feeling?
I'm fine, Pops.
What's on your mind?
I can't explain it. Navigating without a compass, eyes waiting, started to wonder. Metamorphosis, the loss of who you thought you was.
When your kid can't find the language, help them find the lyrics. Listen to the Sound It Out album and get tips and tools to start a conversation at sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by Ad Council and Pivotal Ventures.
At City National, we listen to you.
I want to expand my business and my legacy.
I want to set up the next generation for success.
I want to see my vision come to life.
I want to feel right at home. Your goals, passions, vision, future. We want to hear it and work alongside you to achieve it. Visit cmb.com to learn more. City National Bank. Here for our clients and communities.
Do you have both Medi-Cal and Medicare? The new LA Care health plan called LA Care Medicare Plus, HMO DSNP, can help you get the most out of your health plan for $0 premium. LA Care is here to provide Angelenos with access to quality health care at an affordable cost. For $0 premium, you can get full benefits from vision coverage and in-home support services to prescription drug coverage, plus more. Call 855-688-1479. 855-688-1479.
Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
All right, here's what Kevin Hart had to say recently. And by recently, I mean these are comments that were made at a conference, we are told, in 2021 at a growth conference made in 2021. But these comments made at this conference somehow got out, and they are now viral. And I wanted to check with Everett Sands, the CEO of Lendistry, to get his take on what Kevin Hart had to say. Let me quote. If you look in the hood, there's liquor stores and check cashing places. You know why? Because they know the people in the hood aren't smart enough to open up bank accounts. They're going to get a check, they're going to cash it, and it's a liquor store right next to it. Hart said, attempting to address socioeconomic inequality. I continue to quote. Let's just put that around them. Let's also put a bunch of ish. You know what I'm saying here. That's easy and cash available. We don't want them opening up bank accounts. Those are some of the words of Kevin Hart, that people in the community aren't smart enough to open up bank accounts. Everett Sands, from the CEO of Lendistry, good to have you back on the program. How are you today, for starters? How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Tavis. Good to talk to you as always.
Good to have you on. So I wanted to get your take on this as the CEO of this major entity, Lendistry. When you read or heard, again, these comments from Kevin Hart that have now gone viral, made some time ago, but now, again, all over social media, how did you read them?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think the first thing I thought is Kevin made a mistake. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I've heard him speak before. In your dealings and my dealings, is sometimes people catch us a little bit off guard. You're caught between kind of the intellectual wisdom of what you're trying to put out, and your brain snaps is firing like 10,000 words a minute. And he probably was somewhere between pissed at structured systemic racism and also trying to convey a point, right? So I think the first thing is he made a mistake. Now, I think the bigger topic is what he's brought to light, some things that we do know. Right, banking in our communities, basically, it's something that's broken, right? Like the community banks are not there anymore, and that leads to two things. The first thing is we, as a people, don't fully get to appreciate or get that education on how the banking system works. So how can we become a good depositor? How do we become a good lending customer? How do we leverage the banking system to build wealth? The second part of that is understanding how the banking system works so that we could become lenders, right? So that we can run financial institutions that can help us, again, build our own wealth, that can help us distribute capital to our communities. And naturally, there's some repercussions of not having either sides of that. So, that's kind of my initial thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about the following, and that is that while one could debate what Kevin Hart meant and what he said, whether or not he ought to stick to comedy and leave the commentary to other people, one can debate that till the cows come home. What is not debatable is that many banks have abandoned communities of color over years. This ain't nothing new. They've been doing it for quite a while now. They've abandoned communities of color. We call it banking redlining. They disappear, and they force you into these check cashing places. They force you into giving up a greater percentage than you otherwise would if you had access to a bank to open up a bank account. Let me just start by asking your read on the abandoning of communities of color by banks over decades.
Well, yeah, I mean, initially, it was thought that we weren't good credit customers. It was thought that there might be additional violence or other things that could happen inside of that bank branch, which we all have now learned that bank branches don't even have a lot of money in them, right? Because most stuff is digital. And then there was the third part, which is, are they earning enough fees? Just the concept of branch banking in general, right? And I think just generally speaking, branches, just as a concept, outside of JPMC, Chase, and Wells, most banks have streamlined. I mean, let me give you some perspective numerically. There were 10,000 banks with $1 billion in assets almost 10 years ago. Now there's 1,000. I mean, banks have consolidated. You know, in areas like where you are in LA, U.S. Bank just bought Union Bank, PNC Bank just bought BBVA, Pacific Western is merging with Bank of California. So every single day we're losing these bank branches, and then they're turning around and saying, okay, where could I be most profitable, if I could be profitable at all? And unfortunately, there's a perceived risk associated with the neighborhoods we're talking about. And then, quite frankly, if we're being honest, our younger generations don't go into branches as much as they used to. So there is some concept of it's not as valuable as it used to be.
And yet, I'm wondering how I am to read the fact that these banks that obviously in the business of making money seems to have surrendered all of this cash on the table to other entities, including these check cashing places. That's a lot of money to walk away from.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I look at it two ways. So the first way, let me look at it more polished and academic, is what I said before. We've got to learn to be lenders, right? We also got to talk to our policymakers about things like Community Reinvestment Act, which is the act that was created so that the bank would look at where it was having its money, look at its deposits, and then turn around and reinvest in their neighborhood. Now, let me give you the kind of non-political answer. It's kind of crazy if you just think about it, right? Like, you could drive past a sign that says payday lending. Like, you know that it is literally poisoning our community from the financial side. Like, imagine a sign outside that said drug dealing, or imagine a sign outside, that said something like, I don't even want to say it on the radio show, but you get my point, right? Like you get my point. Like, it's crazy that we could literally have this overt outward sign of something that is literally destroying our finances. And yeah, it's a slow kill. There's no doubt, just like liquor and alcohol and other things. But it is still a kill at the end of the day, and it's something we've got to figure out how to reverse.
No, I take your point. The sign might as well just say, "Come inside and get pimped." Just come inside and get pimped. No, that's basically what they're doing. I digress on that. But what about Kevin Hart's comment? And again, to your point, let's give the brother the benefit of the doubt. Maybe just speaking off the cuff, as I said, I think oftentimes these comedians ought to stick with what they know. Comedy, stay out of the commentary lane, especially when you're trying to critique socioeconomic conditions and you ain't well-versed or studied in that arena. You are not a banker. That said, I think what alarmed and offended people was his suggesting that these people aren't smart enough to open up bank accounts. One, you're indicting their intellect, and secondly, you're blaming them. They aren't smart enough to open up bank accounts, as if they don't have the intellect, number one, and number two, as if there are banks on every other corner anywhere, when in fact we know there are not banks on every corner. There are liquor stores. You're right about that. There are liquor stores on every corner. So the indictment of their intellect and the blaming of them, I think, is what offended people, Everett.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And this is where I'm saying I think we give him a bit of a break, and I think he made a mistake. Because let's be clear, his history is he's from North Philly. North Philly, insert, any other neighborhood in the U.S., rough times, rough area, doesn't have the bank branches, has the check cashing, has the payday loan places, and has the liquor stores, right? So he's coming from a place, and hopefully he hasn't forgotten it, actually, which is, I think, ultimately one of your points, where he was, where he saw this, right? I think the second part where he's talking about the intellect, I think that's a mistake too. I think what he would have said, if he could retract it, if he could go back and say, look, they're trying to brainwash us into thinking that this is okay, right? It's almost like making it immune. I've heard on your show the young lady talking about, what's going on across, in the Middle East. Like, we don't want to become immune to killings. We don't want to become immune to check cashing and the fees and the different things like that, and think that's just a way of business. But unfortunately, that's what's happening when that's the only thing you have. You start to believe this is the way the economy is driven, or at least your household economy is driven. That losing, then our numbers show 30%. I hope that's wrong. But losing 30% of the check as it relates to check cashing and other payday lending services, you start to think, okay, I had $1,000, I only have $700. That's the way it's supposed to be. Because again, that bank branch is not there, or that education facility, which a branch usually is not there to help you out.
He's the CEO of Lendistry. His name is Everett Sands. When we come forward, some advice from him specifically about black folk and banking. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
Hello?
Man, where are you? I thought you were coming.
I can't. I'm in bed with the flu.
The flu? Whoa. Grandma's about to crowd surf. Man, I'll call you back.
Don't get stuck at home with the flu. A flu shot is safe, effective, and you can get it at the same time as your COVID-19 vaccine. A flu shot is the best way to prevent the flu and its potentially serious complications. Don't get flu FOMO. Learn more at getmyflushot.org.
Brought to you by the AMA, CDC, and the Ad Council.
Only 1 in 5 people with autism are employed, despite many having the skill set and desire to work.
Maybe it's because employers don't know what kind of jobs they can do. Like, what about a programmer?
That's a job for someone with autism.
How about a healthcare worker?
Yep, that is too. People with autism can do a lot of different jobs, but often get overlooked due to outdated stigmas. Introducing WIN by Autism Speaks. We help businesses lead the way in inclusive hiring.
What about a ranch hand?
To learn more, go to autismspeaks.org/win.
As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
That's what we were taught, service before self.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
At Susan G. Komen, we believe that ending breast cancer needs all of us working together. Because if you've just been diagnosed and don't know where to turn, we've got you. If you can't afford the treatment you need, we've got you. And if you are driven to honor the loved one you've just lost, we have a place for you here. Because of you, we're supporting those who need help today while tirelessly searching for tomorrow's cures. Visit Komen.org and be a part of our Susan G. Komen community today.
Sounds different, huh? This is Tavis Smiley.
I'm hearing some commentary, Everett Sands, from listeners who are suggesting that they want to give Kevin Hart the benefit of the doubt as well, and they believe that Kevin was really speaking in the voice of the bank, that the bank thinks that we aren't smart enough to open up bank accounts. I'm not sure I'm buying that, but it's another perspective. Before I get back to that, some breaking news here. I knew this was going to happen. I think we all did at some point. A federal judge in the election case that Donald Trump is up against has imposed a limited gag order. A federal judge has now imposed a limited gag order on Donald Trump. The order pits the First Amendment rights of a presidential candidate against the responsibilities of a judge to protect witnesses and to preserve the integrity of the proceedings. This is always fascinating for me because you knew at some point that some judge was going to slap a gag order on him because he's just out of control. In this instance, it happens to be the black judge, the black federal judge, Tanya Chutkan, who we've discussed many times before on this program. She is, it's a narrowly tailored order by the judge. She left Trump free as he proceeds his campaign for president to continue disparaging the Justice Department if he wishes, President Biden and other political adversaries if he wishes, but he cannot make remarks that are directly connected to the case. He certainly cannot make statements that are attacking witnesses, prosecutors, or court staff involved in the federal criminal case, which he is involved in right now. This is the one where he's accused of conspiring to overturn the 2020 election. So Judge Tanya Chutkan, this black female judge, has again now imposed a limited gag order against Donald Trump for saying nasty things about witnesses, prosecutors, or court personnel involved in this particular case. She has not as yet decided or said how she would punish him if, in fact, he does cross the line. She says she's taking that under consideration, so she's not offered an opinion as yet as to what the punishment will be or would be if he crosses the line and violates her order. But this black federal judge, Tanya Chutkan, has now imposed a limited gag order on Donald Trump. We will see in the days and weeks ahead if he can honor that order from this particular judge. There you have some breaking news, our remaining moments, whatever it stands when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
From the Mert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between two turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dominique DePrima from the show First Things First, weekday mornings from 6 to 9. Join us tomorrow with NAACP Image nominee and IG political influencer George Lee Jr., a.k.a. The Conscious Lee, plus headlines and your phone calls only on KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580 stands for Unity and Healing. African Focus Incorporated is a nonprofit organization based in California that focuses on the growth and well-being of Africans all around the world. Their mission is to promote the well-being of people of African descent through knowledge and appreciation of one another by building a bridge of love and understanding. African Focus Incorporated strives for cultural, educational, and economic growth. They're the organization behind the African Family Induction Ceremony, African Goodwill Awards, African Focus Trailblazer Tours, African Dance Competition, and Showcase Los Angeles, Family Day, Good News Windows Microfinance Project, and more. To volunteer, travel with African Focus, or to attend one of their community building events, please call 310-676-7730. That's 310-676-7300. Or visit AfricanFocus.org. This is a diaspora-wide community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin Ultra Strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Ready to re-examine your assumptions and expand your inventory of ideas? More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
Sorry about that, Everett, about that breaking news. Had to get that out of the way about Donald Trump. Everybody's been waiting to see if, in fact, one of these judges would impose a gag order, and the sister federal judge, Tanya Chutkan, is first up. I suspect she won't be the last to impose a gag order in these various cases that Donald Trump has to navigate himself through, particularly during this presidential election season. But it's tough because you can impose a gag order, but the guy is running for president, and any judge is going to bump up against his First Amendment rights to free speech. And so she, again, narrowly tailored this gag order on Trump, and so we'll see how that plays itself out. In the few minutes I have left with you, though, back to Kevin Hart and these comments that we've been discussing for the last 30 minutes or so. What is your advice for black folks specifically these days when it comes to banking? As you mentioned, the banking industry has changed in a variety of ways. Stuff has been streamlined. There aren't as many branches as there used to be. Everything is digital. And yet, in the midst of all that, we know the black community always gets played when it comes to banking, redlining, et cetera, et cetera. So in this present moment, what's your advice to black folk when it comes to banking and how they ought to go about considering it and pursuing it?
Yeah, so I think it breaks down to three things, and it is kind of revolves around that word smart, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we get smarter in terms of our practices? So the first is education. I think with the youth, we got to teach the young people about bank accounts and checks and, balancing their finances and things like that. Teenagers, we got to think about teaching them about credit, on-time payments, types of loans, inquiries, et cetera. Adults, we got to start teaching them about how to own a business or invest in a business, about real estate. So that's education is one. Two is support. Robert Smith a couple of weeks ago said those of us that are business owners need to figure out how to give out more internships. Mm-hmm. And what he's really saying is let's figure out ways to get us in the room so that we can learn the vocabulary and vernacular and all the other things that are necessary that you just can't get unless you get that water cooler talk. And then I think the third thing is for institutions like Lendistry, we and myself, we've got to figure out ways to support our other mission-based lenders, empower others. We've got to figure out ways to skip steps. So, I had to apply for an SBA license, maybe Vermont Slauson or some of the other ones out there, or LISC, et cetera. Maybe some others won't have to apply for the license as mission-based institutions. And we got to figure out how to expand our reach, not reinventing the wheel, So if we've got community organizations in North Philly or somewhere else across the country, Lendistry doesn't need to go in there. We need to figure out how to partner and collaborate. So those are the things I think will help us get to the next level as we keep trying to move forward.
How would you rate, finally here, how would you rate the financial literacy of the black community writ large in this moment?
I think we have the haves and have-nots just like any other community, but I think there definitely needs to be more stress, focus, whatever the appropriate word is, in terms of how do we get that education going. And it could be in a digital format too, right? We got to get our kids off the TikTok, and I'm not saying they got to be off completely, but 15 to 30 minutes a week would change things drastically. So I think there's no silver bullet in how we do this. I think we need to get more innovative how we spread that word and get that information out there.
Everett Sands is CEO of Lendistry, and he appears regularly on this program to talk about financial issues. And I appreciate his time today to unpack these comments by Kevin Hart that some were offended by, many were confused by, but I think we've done it justice, and we will move forward with the rest of this program. Everett, for now, thanks for coming on the program. We'll do it again soon. All the best to you, sir.
Same to you, sir. Talk soon. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Some more great show in front of us. Rebecca Claren is our next guest, talking about her Jewish ancestors who fled a violent ethnic riot in Russia for the U.S., only to start over in South Dakota, but they did so on stolen land. It's quite a story. And she's courageous and transparent in talking about it. We'll get to that in a few moments here. And then our third hour today, Danny Mullen, the sister bookstore owner in Chicago, with her reading list for the fall. And we'll wrap today's program in celebration of Phyllis Wheatley, 250 years later, the nation's most famous African-American poet, the first published black poet. So some great show in front of us. Stick around. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
KBLA